board meeting, the Richland County Board to order. And I will ask Ruth Kalish, is he here? Yes. Was it posted properly?
It was, you want to roll?
Would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Carroll. Here. Miller.
Here.
Brewer.
Here.
Steve.
Here.
McKee.
Here.
Renish.
Here.
Luck. Manny. Here. Gotcho. Glassburner.
Here.
Jenvis. Turk.
Here.
Cosgrove.
Here.
Frank. Severson.
Present.
Williamson.
Here.
Hui. Fleming.
Here.
Boyce.
Here.
And McGuire.
Here.
You have 15 to 21 young.
Thank you. I'll lead us in the pledge. Please stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. We have a short agenda, 8-point agenda, looking for approval. Mr. McGuire, seconded by Mr. Renish. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, stand the agenda. Minutes of the February 20th meeting were published, quite short. I'm going to declare those approved as published. Public comment. Do we have a public comment? Any desire for public comment? Okay, with us tonight will be Mr. Andy Phillips. And we're continuing the discussion we started on the 20th about the Richland County Board rules, how they might apply compared to state statute. And we'll continue that discussion. I'll turn it over to Mr. Phillips.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so on the board rules, I made some notes at our last meeting. Thank you, everybody, for the input that we had at the meeting and for the input received after the meeting. And so I think it might be helpful to go through the rules, find where we have areas of concern that remain, address those concerns, and hopefully get to a point where we have at least consensus about trying to finalize a draft of these rules to present to another meeting for hopeful adoption. So does that sound like an okay strategy here?
That sounds very good. A couple of us were talking today. Probably we won't be ready for the final product for our March board meeting. We may have to squeeze another special meeting in there.
Yes, and I think that whatever process you think is going to be most helpful to the board is, I would obviously defer to that process, but that sounds right to me.
Thank you. We're looking probably in yes, before the board meeting. Tuesday before, what date would that be? Well,
See how far we get tonight. Why are we making that decision now?
you don't want it, don't you want to come to another meeting?
No.
March 12th is the tentative date. Okay, Mr. Phillips.
Okay, so my first question for the board is if we are going to codify the rules in ordinance. And I think we discussed this a little bit at the last meeting, but I wanted to get a sense of the board as to whether you wanted these codified, made a part of your code. I think that there are, I recommend doing that. It's certainly not required. Other counties do not, and other counties do. The reason I like them codified in ordinance is then the public is aware of what the board rules are, and they have a level of permanence within the counties that I think is helpful in terms of establishing, again, the foundation by which you're going to govern yourselves. And so if I could just get a sense from the board as to whether you believe these will be codified, because then that would impact the final resolution that we have to adopt the board rule.
What's your pleasure here, committee? What's your feeling?
Question,
Mr. Renish?
does it affect the ability to amend the board rules?
Well, it affects the ability because if you look at the board rules, we have a supermajority requirement in there in order to amend the rules. Of course, if you have an ordinance on the books, you have to follow certain publication requirements as it relates to amending those ordinances. Those publication requirements would not apply if you do not put them into ordinance, but otherwise it would be the same process.
Suspension, same thing? Suspend the
Suspension
rules?
would not require, you can suspend the rules, whether it be in an ordinance or not in an ordinance, you can suspend the rules by the same procedure.
Suspension would be a procedural Robert's rules kind of thing. Anyone else? Feeling, Mr. Sieb, you should have a comment.
My question was answered regarding suspension of the rules.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
well, yes,
so which one hampers us the most, codifying or not codifying it? I'm thinking of in the future, if we want to change something, which one is more difficult to change something?
Well, it's more difficult to change an ordinance because it's a much bigger deal, so to speak. You have to go through, as I said, the publication requirements and so on. But I mean, that's part of the reason that I like codifying it in ordinance is that it does become a permanent feature that you're not revisiting every meeting. But again, there are other counties that don't put them into ordinance for that reason, because they feel as though they want to have an easier ability to amend the rules as they go along. So it's really up to you as to how you like to see it done.
Okay, thank you.
yes.
So Core Council has a question. Andy, are you talking about adopting the entirety of the rules within the text of the ordinance? Or are you talking about something, you know, the rules of the board as may be adopted by the county board and incorporated herein by reference hereunto, that sort of thing? Or are you talking about putting the whole thing right there in the code?
I would put the whole thing right in the code.
So I think I made clear my preference is always for flexibility. And so I'm going to disagree with my esteemed colleague here. The language that I just alluded to would allow for incorporation and reference to the rules within the code of the ordinance, within the text of the ordinance itself, but would not actually formally adopt the language of the rules. So basically, if someone looked at the ordinances and said, how does the county board rule itself? There'd be a section that says rules of the board. The county board may adopt rules governing its procedures, which are incorporated herein by reference hereunto. And then that would trigger a dutiful reader to go look and try and find wherever those rules are. So they would be a separate document, which could be amended without the necessity of needing an ordinance amendment. But they would be referenced to within the code of ordinances.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
Wow.
Sieb.
Mark, is it possible, I guess I said this in general, is it possible that in perhaps the first year here, we may find a few bugs in the system that might require amending the code that we are about to approve? And would it be in line with prudence to wait a year until we get some bugs out of the system, some adjustments made before we consider the question of codification? So I in general agree with your statement at this point.
Mr. Renish?
Yeah, you can.
I kind of live by the fact that it's frustrating enough when somebody else ties your hands. It's kind of dumb to tie your own. So I'm for having a little bit of freedom.
Okay.
I
Andy,
agree.
I don't think we want to make them codified. You know?
And we can always change it later.
We can always change
We
it
can
later.
adopt it later on.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Sieb.
are we, at what point do we affirm or vote on each of these questions?
Not till probably the March board meeting.
I see.
Okay, Mr. Andy.
Yes, and that's fine. And I think further to that point, if you decide down the road that you want to codify, that's absolutely fine as well. That's why the beauty of this is that these are your rules. And so I think that that is a fine outcome. If I skip over anything as I'm scrolling through my copy of the rules here as points for board input and decision, please stop me. Because again, I'm going based on my notes and some of the feedback received thus far. The next item that I wanted to discuss relates to item, I don't know what page you have in terms of the pagination of your rules, but 2.02 sub E, toward the end of that provision, I had inserted the penalty of $10 per meeting where somebody requests hard copy. And there was some discussion surrounding that item at the last meeting. And I wanted to revisit that to see thoughts on if you wanted to have a penalty at all for somebody requesting a hard paper copy of any materials distributed in anticipation of a meeting, or $10 was the right number, or what the board thought on that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Steve.
in all the years I've been here, I don't claim to be an elder, but I've been here 12 years. And we always received any kind of documentation we needed from the county clerk's office or any other office at no cost, because it was in conjunction with our duties. It would be a different matter if we wanted something copied for personal purposes. But I think it's quite a sacrifice for most people to serve on the county board, and in terms of compensation, it's practically nil. I think it's asking too much to ask board members to pay $10 for hard copy documentation.
It's intended to push people into using the electronic method, not.
I understand that, but you may have someone like me who can't see come along, who has to have a large magnifier that he has to put a document under in order to understand. So you'd have to make exceptions for someone like a blind person under the American Disabilities Act.
Were you asking for the floor, Gary?
No, but I concur with Mr. Steve though, that should be a $10 charge for getting copies in order for us to do our duties. You can't bound somebody to an electronic device when they don't have it at home or needs to have that.
That would be my feelings also.
Thank you.
We might get another excavator on the board.
Well, why don't we, should be an informal vote, but how about a show of hands? Who thinks that we ought to charge $10 for a paper copy?
Just make a comment.
Yes.
I understand the intent of what Mr. Phillips is suggesting. I think $10 is awfully steep. I do think, I mean, you guys have graciously provided us with electronic devices. There are definitely instances when we can't maybe access that. So I don't know if there'd want to be provisions for that kind of thing, but I get what he's saying. I just think $10 is awfully steep.
Okay.
$10 is cheap.
Steve.
Too high.
All right, who's in favor of $10? Who's not in favor of $10? Okay. Andy, informal vote is no $10.
Okay, so I'll remove any reference to the fee. Is that right?
Yes?
Yes.
All right. Let
Just
me make
having
that
a lower
note.
fee. I mean, it is a lot of paperwork.
And that comes with us in the county board when we set our budget. We do per diems and we set that for county board supervisors. We need to increase our budget to allow for printed copies for county board supervisors. If that's the cost.
Except
Well, we do have to have some printed copies for the public. Agendas, et cetera. So,
And there's actually a statute, I believe, where the public requests copies that there's a reasonable or nominal fee to be paid.
right,
And that's the statute.
okay. I think that one's done, Andy.
Okay, so moving on to 2.04 sub D as in David, Committee Expenditure Authority. There was discussion at our last meeting about a procurement policy, and I was curious about where and how much the delegation is as it relates to a committee authorizing expenditures consistent with the county budget. The reason I ask that is I wonder if 2.04D is needed if we're going to have a policy that addresses procurement and expenditure authority. I know that there are various resolutions on file that relate to not to exceed amounts that committees can approve. And I think the intent was to look at those resolutions and try to put them in an overall fiscal policy, which is great. I'm in favor of that because then it's all in one spot. But that got me to thinking, is sub D necessary? Or do we just eliminate that provision in its entirety?
Yes, Administrator Pesh.
So the procurement policy that we are working on and the financial policy would, I believe, make D unnecessary because all of that information is then outlined in the financial policy and in the procurement policy. So that's just as we're designing it. But again, up to you if you want it here and there, but it will be addressed in the procurement and financial policy.
So we delete it.
I think that, and just as a reminder, that doesn't negate any previous resolutions that were establishing that policy. It's just merely deleting the reference to that here in the board rules. And so I think we'll delete subsection D for right now.
I have a question, 204.
Mr. Severson.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question on 204, where it says committees of the county board and other boards and commissions creation and existence. What is the difference between a committee, a commission, a board, and trustees? I listened to that, your last meeting on the 12th, and I didn't see any of that coming to talk about. So what is the difference with all of them that we have?
Okay, I'll give that to Mr. Phillips. Can you answer that?
So when we look at this concept of committees versus boards and commissions, the distinction is important because with the administrative form of government under 59.18 of the statutes, your administrator appoints members of boards and commissions, but your committees are appointed according to whatever process this board establishes. And so when we think of committees, we think of standing committees of the board, whether they're required by statute or not. And when we think of other boards and commissions, we think of entities that are outside of the sphere, if you will, of standing committees of the board. I'll give you an example. If you look at the highway committee, it's required by statute, but it's also a standing committee of the board. And so that committee is populated by the county board. If we look at a commission on aging, that is a commission that is required by statute that is populated by appointment from your administrator. And so that's the distinction between those two. And the discussion we're going to have later on in this meeting is trying to clarify the distinction between those through the Appendix A, which is the list of committees and other boards and commissions. So everybody has an understanding of what is considered a committee of the board and what is considered an other board or commission. Because the standing committees belong under the purview of the county board. That's not anything the county administrator has anything to do with. The other boards and commissions are administrator appointments. They serve a function within county government, but it's not the same function that we would think of as a standing committee having.
And boards and commissions have some statutory language where they have to follow certain laws, I guess, or they have certain powers granted than what committees actually do.
Generally, yes. And the reason I'm hesitating there is that there may be other commissions that are created by virtue of an intergovernmental agreement, for example, that do not have standalone statutory powers, but they have powers that come about because of an agreement that you have with the city of Richland Center or an agreement that you have with other counties or whatever the case may be. But generally speaking, you're correct.
I know that before we called our highway committee a highway commission, I believe. And we called the Pine Valley board, that was a board of trustees. Were those incorrect, Andy?
I mean, it's technically the naming, I would change the naming, but I don't think it's incorrect because it doesn't matter what it's called. What matters is the function that it serves.
Well, but we always held with those two entities that it had to be an Australian vote. Had to do a closed secret ballot to obtain those because they were commissions. We were probably off
Yeah.
base there. I think that was on advice of prior corp counsel.
Yeah, I don't know that a secret ballot was appropriate there. But I don't know again that the name matters much in terms of whether it's a secret ballot or open vote.
Okay. All right. Committees.
Chair Brewer,
Yes.
Linda Jones. I'd like that clarified a little more because we always thought that we absolutely had to do that by a vote. And there must have been a reason.
Pine Valley group you're talking about?
And the highway.
I think there was language in statutes that said that we had to do it by ballot, but that was prior to having a county administrator.
So maybe you said.
So the answer here, Mary, was that perhaps all changed when we became administrator of Form County.
This is Linda, but I thank you.
Well, and I will just say that the statute that talks 83.015, which talks about the highway committee, it does refer to an election of that highway committee. And so you were probably following that statute and electing members of the committee. But then there's a provision also within that statute that the county board can change the way that happens. The manner of appointments can change. So it wouldn't surprise me in the past that you had an election, and it wouldn't surprise me either that you may have changed that at some point in time.
Okay. Did we answer your initial question, Gary?
Someone.
Okay. Well, it's probably as good as you get.
We're gonna talk about it later on. That's probably we're gonna talk further on that.
Okay. Want to continue, Andy, please?
So section 2.05 is a section that nobody was interested in last time, and that was with how we comprise our committees, who gets to appoint them, who gets to remove them, and so on. I say that understanding full well that I'm joking. So I'm looking for direction from the board, just by consensus, not official vote or anything, what type of procedure you want to follow. I can tell you what other counties do, and I can tell you what I've seen work and what I've seen not work. But again, it's up to you as to how you want to handle the committee appointment process.
Well, please
tell
us about other counties, would you please?
You bet. So typically what I see is that the committees are appointed and the chair and vice chair of those committees are appointed by the county board chairs subject to county board confirmation. So the board chair will make committee assignments, assign a chair and a vice chair, submit that to the county board for approval. The county board then is free to either confirm, deny, modify, whatever the case may be, based upon what the board chair submits. I like that process because of ease of administration. It's quicker than going through a different process, whether it be full board vote or a committee on committees vote. And so I like that. Now, I've also seen other counties use committee on committees and things of that nature. And it works, but it takes a little bit longer. The reason that I like the board chair appointment as well is that the board chair has been elected by the board as leadership of the county board. And so there is some level of confidence that the board would have in the board chair's actions in appointing members of committees and the chair and vice chair of those committees. The statute itself, in talking about this concept of appointments to committees, does speak to the board chair making those appointments. And so I would say that in the majority of counties that I've worked with, it's a board chair appointment subject to board confirmation. But again, it's up to this board as to how you believe committees ought to be comprised. I think that the board rules ought to specify the process for removal from a committee. That's a question I get often in other counties. Typically, the power of appointment carries with it the power of removal. So in the absence of any sort of board rule that says this is how somebody is removed from a committee, if, for example, the board chair appoints members to a committee, the board chair can remove persons from committees. If it is a committee on committees that makes appointments, the committee on committees has to remove, again, in the absence of a separate process dealing with removals. I like to have the process in the board rules so we avoid confusion and avoid questions about who has the power to remove. So that's my spiel, so to speak. And again, just looking for direction from the board on how you'd like to see your committees comprised and then how we deal with the removal process.
Mr. McKee. We skipped over this. I think at the last meeting.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sieb.
Yes. Mr. Phillips, I really appreciate your viewpoint. And I know that you won't be offended if I modestly disagree. I strongly favor a committee on committees system to set up the organizational structure. And I believe that the committee on committees should solicit, of course, the preference list is submitted by the members, indicating what committees they want to serve on. The committee and committees should review that and make recommendations to the chair. And I think that there should be some consensus among committees, not a vote, as to who is selected to serve on based upon their capabilities. I don't like, based upon my experience here, I don't like putting the burden of making those decisions or the power of making those decisions on one person or one or two persons, the vice chair and vice chair. I think people feel more involved if a committee itself is involved in selecting and making recommendations. We know that our board chair has such charisma that he can probably win his way in terms of the choices that he would like to see appointed anyway. But my preference is committee.
Mr. Reddish.
Much more democratic.
Mr. Reddish.
I'm okay with what Andy's saying because of the fact that we're not giving you power, whether it be you or Dave or the next chair, because it still has to be approved by the board. It's an expeditious process. We all get drugged down here anyway. So it's not giving you power. It's actually making you a target, but you're good at that. I mean, you're good for that.
Well, in other words, the chair would give a list of recommendations at the formation meeting and the board would approve it.
Exactly. Still approved by the whole board.
Ingrid?
Can I ask a clarifying question on that, Mr. Chair?
You may.
Let's say something happened where the board did not confirm an appointment. What would be the recourse in that situation? Would the board as a whole then put forth nominations, or would you be coming back with a different recommendation? And the reason why I ask that is because honestly, I mean, just based on my time on the board, I rarely see any recommendation overturned simply because it would take a vast majority of people on the board to do that. And most people haven't had any thought about it prior to here are the recommendations. What do you say? And that's one of my problems with that particular process is not so much that I disagree necessarily with the board's recommendation, but simply actually to add on to what Don was saying, I do think that the committees have some thought and you know, they have interest in who might be their chair, their vice chair, and some of them have had people sitting on those boards for a while who have valuable insight into that as well. And so it's a little bit difficult when, as a whole, you're asked as a board to just vote on some recommendations for a committee that you may not have sat on or have any investment in. And so the people that are on that committee might be a very small portion of the people that are actually voting for those chairs and vice chairs.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Seep, if you have anything new, I'll listen to it.
do, but, deliver, so.
Mr. Chair,
I'll let it go.
Okay, is anyone else? McKee?
Mr. Chair,
Have we had any problems with committee appointments?
It's just basically the timing. It takes a long time to get where we need to go. Anyone else?
yes, Mr. Chair, may I speak?
Go ahead, Barb.
When I got on this committee, or I'm sorry, when I got on the board, I knew nothing about anything. And I was impressed at how we decided who got on what committee. I thought that people saying what they liked or what they were interested in or what they cared about got to be on the committee that mattered. However, I don't think that the chair of the board should pick the chair and the co-chair of the committee, because those on the committee, to me, seem to know more. I mean, they should be the ones who decide who's going to be the chair and the co-chair. The committees that I've been on, the people who were picked as chair by that committee have done such an excellent job because they're knowledgeable. I don't think changing that is a good idea. It's just my impression.
Okay. Manning.
Vote for the chair and the vice chair. We have enough trust in voting for them. Couple people that.
Mr. Chairman, to the point that Chair.
Right, the preference sheet. There'll be a preference sheet going out.
Sorry.
A preference sheet will be sent
Okay.
to all incoming members.
The argument was made, I think, in a previous meeting, or the comment was made, that if the committee elects its own chair, that chair may have a conflict with the county board chair. I think that's fine, because in a democracy, there is room for opposing ideas and the free discussion of opposing ideas. I don't think everybody needs to wear the same stripe. So I don't agree with that.
Mr. Turk?
Mr. Chair, I was just gonna say, given how the discussion is flowing here, perhaps it would make sense for us to say, yes, we'll have our chair appointing the committees, but then let the committees elect their own leadership. That's what my comment was gonna be as well.
I agree.
Ms. Glasvenner?
Mr. Chair?
I
May I
will take
speak,
Ingrid first.
Mr. Chair?
Mary, we'll come back to you. Linda, hang on.
That is what we
Okay.
did the last time. And I felt that the committees electing their chair and co-chair, that went very smoothly. I have not heard that there has been any problems on any of those committees with their selections. So I don't have a problem with that process. I know that we did discuss at the last meeting that the way that we had the committee appointments go was rushed and difficult for the chair. And so I think that we should not be voting on that right now. Like, I think we need to have further discussion on then how do these committee appointments look? Because maybe that just depends on how we do our meetings, which we had also discussed. Are we going to have an extra meeting? Are we going to try to cram it all into one meeting? There's a lot to be in that discussion. I don't think we're ready to just vote on a process.
Linda?
I think this is the whole point of being on the board, is your committees that you're on and how you are active on those. And I don't know any other way than the committee on committees or the board chair, but if inefficiency in the beginning is the whole reason, we had a list of preferences, I think, would go to a committee on committees, and they would meet way before the board and work that out and know what each person's background is, because you give a bio of yourself and you know what you can do to be the best contributor to this county board. And I think that's very hard for one person to have to do all that. And I think a committee on committees is more democratic, even if it takes a little longer, it isn't that much longer, because it's impossible, as Ingrid said, at the county board meeting, for us to say, oh, I don't think that should be the committee, or that should. I think there's more respect in general for the committee on committees and how they would choose. And then the committees choose their board chair and vice chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carroll,
My question is this going to be the only function of this committee on committees, or are they going to have other roles through the year? For example,
That's what they do.
reviewing the committee structure.
no, the only thing the committee on committees did was make the initial
And that's what I
appointments.
wanted to clear.
But if we had to make appointments during the year, someone left, someone whatever, it would meet quickly before a board meeting usually, or at a break and decide.
One other quick point of consideration, we've been talking about potentially restructuring again the makeup of our committees, how many committees we have, and how many then committee assignments everyone gets. I also think those are valuable discussions to be had before we decide on a process. I don't understand how we would vote on all of this before we even know what our makeup is gonna look like.
Mr. Cosgrove, got a comment for me?
I'm in favor of committee on committees. That worked well before in the past. And
I think, Andy,
I think that works fine. What I can do is I can draft language that speaks to the concept of a committee on committees. The question I have is, how is the committee on committees formed? Is that formed at the organizational meeting by vote of the full board?
yes, how we did it in the past.
Yeah.
Then I can present both options to this board for your consideration, and then you can determine what's the best path forward.
and
so
then an option for chair and vice chair of the committees.
Right, and I was going to suggest another set of options as it relates to removal of persons from committees or committee chairs. And so I think if you have those options laid out before you in black and white in text, you'll be able to make an informed decision about what you think is going to work best. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Stevenson, one last comment?
I believe in our old county board that we had prior to these new county board rules. Committee on committees, it was automatically the chair and the vice chair sat on the committee on committees automatically. They were automatic members, and then the rest of the members of the committee were voted upon by other county board supervisors.
That's correct.
During a ballot,
How many did we have? 7?
something like that. And then the way I viewed it was that after committee on committees was done, since the chair was automatically a member, that he just was taking advice from all the rest of the committee members, and that was his proposal, who sat on those committees. He still chose that.
The chair probably had a list of his own, tried to influence the rest of the committee members to go his way.
Possibly.
Yeah, probably. But always got valuable insight from
Yes,
others. You don't know everyone running.
correct.
You don't know their background, you don't know their history and
You look good on paper sometimes, but
what their areas of expertise might be. Okay, Andy, got that? Clear as mud?
I do. Clear as mud. No, I think that what I want to do is present the board with these options so that you can decide what process you want to follow. And that's not an issue. And I think somebody earlier said that they're not worried about offending me. You're not offending me whatsoever. If you're going to violate a statute, I'll tell you that. But otherwise, like I said, these are your board rules. And so I want everybody comfortable with what your rules are going to be. This does bring me to item D on term limits for committees. There was some discussion of this last meeting about the value of having term limits. I just wanted to make sure there was consensus that, yeah, we're going to maintain term limits within the board rules.
Where are you again?
It's in the same section, item D, so it's 2.05 D as in David.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to understand the value of it. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I just don't particularly understand why we need term limits. Particularly with the amount of turnover that we have. Does anybody, those of you who've been on here much longer than me, have you ever seen where this would be a problem?
Well, I think we had term limits, at least in my impression, is to keep
Yes.
people from rolling it over and running things, to ensure there was always new blood, if you will.
Yes, that's right. One is it avoids the concentration of continuous power in one area or another of government. And I certainly agree with term limits. The statutes in some boards or commissions spell out the term limits. I think 7 years perhaps for parks or one or the other.
If you're.
Otherwise, I'm in favor of all committees and boards that are not specified in the statutes, limited to 6 years. I don't agree at all that one should continue beyond that, except for those that are 7 years specified by statute, or with those that continue.
Mr. McGuire?
Yeah, I just wonder, can you clarify, are you talking about term limits for the committee chair or term limits for committee members?
Committee members. And as I brought up last time, my question for that was, because there are committees where the amount of knowledge needed to be able to, fully understand what's going on takes a long time to build up. And I use Health and Human Services as an example. I've been on there now, not as a board member, not as a county board member, but as a member of that board for 6 years now, because I started before I started as a county board member, as the RN member, and I am still continuing to learn things and still have more things to learn. So it's not about, in my mind, a power thing. It was about, the ability for people to gain some knowledge in an area that's very complicated, and that's why I was bringing it up. I understand and I appreciate the wisdom of you guys who've been on here a lot longer than me. In the amount of time that I've been on, there's been so much turnover that I hadn't really seen that being a problem. But I am fine with whatever you guys decide. I just wanted to bring that as a perspective forward for committee members.
I don't agree.
Harry Severson?
Sorry, it wasn't a question, but I guess, I would, term limits, so how they were in the old county board, I think, we didn't have much turnover. Prior to I got on years ago, they didn't have much turnover in county board members because nobody really ran. So they had like the 6-year limit to have changes what supervisor seat was said. But I do know that having some more experienced people on your board in time to get off, can help train newer ones, get in there with that. But when you have those limits, I believe our rules said that you could be on for 6 years and then you had to be off for a year, but then you could be put back on the committee, or the chair could appoint you back on the committee again. Or if that committee then changed its name, then you could continue. So there was people that stayed on the committee for a lot longer when they changed their committee name. As an example, they went to just having the fair committee, but then Parks also did recycling. So when they changed the fair committee, made it for fair and recycling, then that committee changed over and then was a new 6-year term limit. So people who are at 6 years, technically could have been on for 12 years on the fair.
Mr. McGee?
I think before we did this combining committees, I thought it was a 6-year. You could be on a committee for 6 years.
It was.
Then it would be set when we changed the commission.
That's what I just said.
Clerk Kalish, can you help us out here?
I believe Terry is correct in what he's saying, but I think it's exactly clear.
Would it be easier if we didn't have these term limits? For you?
It does not matter to me.
Mr. Chair,
Well, Manning, you haven't talked yet tonight.
Bill and I were just gonna mention on this committee on committees, I think it's a good idea, but the committee then could look at how long people have been on committees, which committees they've served on, and then, appoint them appropriately. I mean, so you wouldn't necessarily need the term limits if we always had a committee on committee and they looked at that. Just a thought.
Mr. Manning?
We were doing this, what we already have, something in hand where somebody was a wielding too much power, where they could be removed anyway. What do you classify too much power? What was that? We're talking about if there's an issue with somebody being on there too many terms, and I agree with you, that knowledge is power. And having somebody on there that knows what they're doing is one thing, somebody who's trying to push their weight around is another thing. So if that happens, we would have a means to remove them anyway. So I don't have any problem with having no term limit.
Mr. Turk?
The county operates differently, county board operates differently now than it did, and as Carrie refers to it, the old days. Thanks, Carrie, I appreciate it. Where we have an administrator now, there is not so much authority vested in the committees as there was once upon a time in the old days. And we have seen significant turnover almost every election cycle that we never saw back in the old days, so to speak. So it would seem that the perceived necessity for this requirement is much less than it used to be. And it could have that unintended consequence of removing some experience and knowledge from a committee where it could be very beneficial. And as Mr. Manning's pointed out, if you have someone who is a problem, we have a mechanism for removing people from committees if there is a problem.
Could I add a dimension to Mr. Turk's remarks?
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Turk, you're always very fluent and logical. I would slightly disagree. It is different. The committees still have the chair, and the committees still have the ability to elect and manage their own committees. But the administrator has the power to appoint all the members of the boards and commissions, which is a lot of power. And that's a clear difference. The administrator does not appoint the committee chairs. So it's not entirely analogous. Sure.
Yes, Mr. Turk.
That the administrator supervises all the department heads, committees don't do that. And the administrator drives the budget process, committees aren't doing that.
Except for the constitutional officers.
Yes, that's very true.
Okay, anyone else who hasn't spoken?
I agree with Mr. Turk that things have changed. I've been here 8 years. Dave's been here a little longer. Don's been here 12 years. So it is changing every 2 years. We're losing good people. For example, we've lost a lot of good people in zoning this last 2 years. So because we had change, and I think I agree with Ingrid, we need to see where we're going with this document before we know where we're going with some of the document information in this document. So some of this stuff may need to get put off for further discussion. Term limits, I'm okay with no term limits.
Okay,
No term limits?
no term limits. Steve is suggesting no term limits.
We're not voting.
Andy?
Yes, I'm just wondering where the consensus of the board is on the term limits.
I can ask for a show of hands on term limits.
Just an example real quick for term limits. Let's look at the city, for example, City of Richland Center and their Parks Department. I know my Uncle Pat Elliott's been the chair of the Parks, City Parks for I don't know how many years. 20 or more? He's been on there. So there's no term limits with that there. So
All right, I'm gonna ask for hands again. Term limits or not term limits? So term limits, show of hands. Barb saying yes. What's that give me? 1, 2, 3, 4? 4 in favor. So no term limits. A lot more. So right now we're leaning toward no term limits, Sandy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do think that I heard a comment that the Committee on Committees ought to consider tenure as part of the process of appointing persons to committees.
Yes.
And so I think I will suggest, with your permission, Mr. Chair, language, including that on the showing of interest form, if you will.
Yep, I agree.
The other question
Can I
I
just-
had, I'm sorry.
Wait, I
Go
have
ahead.
a question. Because I think we need to think about this a little bit. It just came to me. So a new person comes on the board and the committees stay basically the same except for the person that left. That opening is there. But the new person doesn't really have those talents and has other talents. So when we staggered, not only were you able to go to the committee, especially when you came on, that you had the most talents to start with, but when you staggered, you also could go on other committees and start to learn about those committees. And then when we came to the board meeting, we didn't have many discussions because you start understanding all the committees and you get a good feel for the whole budget and the whole county board. So I just think there's something to be said for that, even though your vote was a hand vote and you're not getting the vote of the people who are oral here.
Okay. Andy?
The other question I had for the board was if we want to establish a process in the board rules to establish dates and times for committee meetings, if that's a matter for the committee to decide, committee chairs, does the board set that? How do we want to establish that?
Say it's up to individual committees.
And that's fine. I just want to, I just noticed it was missing from the board rules, so I want to make sure I
Yes.
put that in there.
Administrator Pesh?
The one point I would make about that is if the goal is, which I do believe the feeling that I've had from prior discussion is to try to get all the meetings done prior to the county board meeting every month, we'll need to think about that then, because if we let the committees decide, then that may not happen. So I do think that as we get into our committee structure discussion, that is a discussion you all should have as far as what that could look like. Because if that goal still remains, where you would like to have all of that done, so we're capturing everything in the same month, it may be difficult to do that on a committee by committee basis. It may need something that would require general consensus from all of you to get done. But again, just keep that in mind as you have these discussions and decide how you'd like to go.
Mr. Chair,
And
Yes, Ingrid Glassmatter?
that just reminded me, we kind of skipped over this section, I think, but I just had a question on our regular meetings of the board. I thought we had voted a while back that we were changing the date of our.
No,
No.
we didn't vote.
So
It
we
was
talked
published,
about-
we did, it was erroneous.
What we discovered was that there were a new set of board rules emailed out and posted erroneously. The vote, in fact, was 19-0 against changing the date.
Okay. All right. Glad we have that cleared up. Thank you.
Carrie Severson?
Reason why I was saying that maybe the committee should look at set their own time and date. So when people got onto the board, traditionally, let's say finance personnel, for example, met at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, I think it was, they used to be. Well, when new members got on the board or they have a work life and they're working during the day. And so they couldn't make that 10 o'clock meeting. And so that's why they moved it to the nighttime or at 5 o'clock. We find it harder with everybody. I think it's just the people on the committees got different schedules, different work life now that majority of us here mostly work. We just need to work on what's a happy medium for us as a committee. As long as we know that county board is on the third Tuesday of the month, your committee should be meeting sometime in between there. We could probably specify that. We should set our own times.
Anyone else on this topic? It was my thought that we had the super standing committees, and it was my feeling that we ought to have set dates for those super standing committees, but
They always used to be super set, but like as an example, finance and personnel, like Look, that's changed tremendously from the membership that's been on there. Like, it used to meet at a certain day on, it was on Tuesdays.
Yeah.
And now we change it and we're meeting on different days. Because people's schedules weren't working.
Mr. Carroll.
Yes, the committees need the major piece of the input, but there needs to be overall coordination, especially since a lot of the committees have department heads, so there needs to be input from that department. And a general coordination still needs to happen, maybe the administrator and the county board chair get together and gather all the information from the committees and then set the overall frame.
That was the argument with finance and personnel going to the nighttime one was now the department had to stay in here later. Like it was, I remember when the county board itself had their meetings at 10 a.m. Tuesdays, we used to meet in winter time at 10 a.m. The whole talk about going to all nights now was like, now our department heads have to stay in town or stay later and they worked all day to present their report or whatever it was. And I understand that you gotta take that into consideration, but.
So Andy, your question was?
How are dates and times for committees meetings?
Sorry, Andy. I guess the consensus here is, other than the county board meeting, which we know when it is and what time it is, we really don't have any other recommendations.
No, I think that's fine. My apologies. I had somebody at the door that I had to go attend to. I apologize. So I think that's right in terms of the only question I have is, do we want to put a deadline in there so that the meetings occur prior to the board meeting to make sure that we don't have a situation where a committee meets 2 days after the board meets and you have to wait an entire month for a resolution to come back to the board, something like that?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll handle it that way.
Ingrid, you
I
handle
was just gonna say, I agree with Ms. Pesh, so I think this is a little bit premature, other than that provision, because we don't know if we're consolidating different committees or not.
Mr. Seeb?
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I appreciate the recognition. I think that the committee should select their own time in accordance with the availability of committee members to that particular time. But I think once that has been done, that the committees should have a regular published schedule of their meeting for the sake of public awareness, so that people can plan ahead. Well, the zoning committee is always on this day and that time, and so I'm going to go to the zoning committee. Kind of thing. So I think once they've established when they can meet, there should be a published regular schedule of meetings.
There should be, with care not to conflict. You know, if we change a meeting night, for instance, we've conflicted with 2 other meetings.
Yes. Once those conflicts are ironed out, then I think that's a pretty good system. I think we did it that way pretty much before.
Mr. McGuire?
Yeah, I don't know if we've ever discussed this about what time we start these committee meetings, but so I'm just going to ask a question. We have multiple choices here because of multiple different committees using this room right here on the same day? Is that what the difference? In time
Well,
is?
that is a consideration now, Dan, yes. Because we're trying to get basically all committee member meetings here in this room because it's broadcast.
Yes, and we have to, I think it's important what you pointed out, that these are public meetings that to be attended by the public. We have to consider that too.
Yes. So anyway, Andy, we're flexible. We want them here in this room.
I will, let me come up with some language, because what I've heard in terms of feedback is that we want to have a regular schedule. We want to get these meetings in before the board meeting, and we want to have some sort of process of establishing the different schedules. So let me come up with some language in terms of that and get it back for the board's consideration.
The Parks Commission used to meet on the first Monday of the month at 5 p.m. It used to. Now we meet the fifth Wednesday or whatever it is. Yeah.
How's that work?
Because that's how it worked with the committee schedule, the people's schedules.
Would you say you meet on the fifth Wednesday of the?
Whatever it is, fourth Wednesday or fifth Wednesday.
Let's move.
We got a long night, people.
Got a lot of ground to cover. Let's move on.
Okay,
Do you
we're
think,
ready.
Andy, that we should, move right over to committee structure since we seem to be bogged down with?
We can. Let me just scroll through and make sure that I don't have any other questions. Then, of course,
Okay,
members
go
of the
ahead.
board are free. All right. One of the questions or one of the issues that was raised is that if we have a vacancy on the board and we have candidates interested in filling the vacancy, right now in the rules that I've put together, it has a 10-minute presentation from those interested candidates. And I think I got some feedback that perhaps 10 minutes was not enough. We don't have to put a time limit in there, by the way, but it's just wanted to feel, do we want a time limit? If so, what should it be? I'm in rule 2.12C. Or excuse me,
Why do we have to
B2.
specify a time? Why can't we just say the time will be allowed, they'll be allowed some time to present their case to the board?
I'm fine with that.
I don't think. that-
You would just have to have a time set by the chair so that each one has equal time.
Yeah. My rule of thumb is 3 minutes, you know, I don't.
Richard and I think a minute.
2. Gary says 2. 10 minutes, heck, you could do, that's the Gettysburg Address. Let me know. It's more than the Gettysburg Address.
Under section 4.01, I did add that the Corporation Council serves as parliamentarian for board meetings and consults with the board chair on questions of parliamentary procedure. For whatever reason, I did not have that in the last draft, so I did add that. And then the next point of, I don't even want to say contention, it's not contention, but the next point of a lot of discussion was this question surrounding remote attendance at meetings. And I got a lot of feedback on that. And so again, if we're going to allow remote attendance at meetings, we need to put it in the board rules. That it has to be there, because the default is that remote attendance is not considered attendance for purposes of counting quorum, for purposes of voting, or anything. And so I'd just like to get, again, consensus feedback from the board about how you want to treat remote attendance at meetings and what rules you want surrounding remote attendance. For example, can people attending remotely be in on closed session portions of a meeting? You can decide that. So I guess I'm just looking for feedback.
Eddie? Board? The board is functioning as a committee. Yes.
On our discussion that last meeting about this, it seemed like the general consensus was we appreciate having the option for a remote attendance, but everyone agreed that closed sessions, people who are in remote attendance would not be allowed in at that point.
That was my slogan.
I don't know that we need to specify all those other qualifications then for remote attendance.
We used to have them in our board rules. What he put down here in the old board rules, that was in there.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
as a person who loves remote attendance and the fact that I'm, 1,000 miles away and I can attend this meeting, of course, I'm all for it. As far as being able to attend the closed session, my impression was that Barb was able, or IT was able to keep us in, but close everybody else out. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I thought that's, because I've been on some of the closed committees.
I think it's a question, Barb, of who's with you in your listening device, who could be near you.
Oh, I see. That could be, yeah.
Could have any number of people there. Have a whole party going on in your.
Yeah, so you have to be able to use
Not
people's honor
discuss
that
pure.
to do that. Okay.
Anyone else? Oh, that, Andy?
Mark, could I ask, so is it the consensus of the board that we allow remote attendance in the discretion of the chair? Do we allow it always? Do we allow it in exceptional circumstances? What do we think on that one?
I think always, because we're in
Okay.
the digital age.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's fine.
But I think you're gonna have
Steve Williamson.
somebody abuses it, you're gonna have some type of consequence. Just to really-
With that being said, I guess we can do Zoom, that's fine. But my thoughts are, it should be, I mean, we call it video or Zoom, so you should have video capabilities where we can see you. And it shouldn't be for people that relocate to Phoenix for 3 months in the winter.
Well,
We're here to serve our constituents. You can't do it from Phoenix or Maryland or Miami or,
well, then you're not, I'm sorry,
I'll get griped on that one, but
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
my feeling.
I agree with you on that.
Any of you folks in Phoenix want to comment on that?
I'm right here in Phoenix and I have no problem with getting all the information I need. And I really don't care if I don't have anybody that's really interested in listening to the county board meetings, but I don't have to know the secret meetings unless I would have to vote. And if I had to vote, I would want to know what I'm voting on.
Closed sessions, not secret meetings, closed sessions.
Well, whatever you call it.
Sure.
As long as I know how to vote when I'm done.
Okay, Mr. Steve?
I see no problem with someone who's in Phoenix for 3 months attending the meeting remotely. You may want to restrict voting because it's 3 months in a row. Or you could have the chair excuse the person for 3 months and not be on.
Yeah, maybe that should be chair discretion.
Excuse me, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Chair, Linda speaking.
Yes.
If we want this, if we want, people-
Linda, Barb, wait for Linda. Linda was on.
okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Linda.
I agree with you, Marty, that we're in the digital age. I'm not on visually tonight because somehow my iPad wasn't updated enough, I guess, to get on, which I'll have to do tomorrow. So I'm only on by phone, and I'm very happy I'm on, and I'm on because I'm sick and not at the meeting. I also think that we shouldn't be discriminating about who or what, because a lot of people who are going to be coming on this board are going to be traveling, maybe working in California for a month, and then they can call in. So I don't think that you can decide who you're discriminating against and who you're not. Obviously, meeting in person is the ideal, but we do live with a different way of work, and we have to accommodate that.
Mr. McKee?
I don't see any problem with anybody, any board member coming and wherever. They are representing their district, even though they may be in Phoenix, because their mailing home address is in the district.
Mr. Manning?
I understand being gone for 30 days, 45 or whatever, but we are here to represent people in our district. If you're not here, you're not talking to the people in your district, and you can't represent them the way you should. So there definitely should be some restrictions on it.
How does the state legislature work?
Well, they get 9 months off to go home and visit.
Mr. Chair, may I respond to that, please?
Manning, maybe you would.
Oh, Barb, we're going back to Barb. I'm sorry, Barb.
Okay, first of all, I can access my home phone and I have my cell phone. And if any of my constituents want to notify me, they can notify me and I hear from them just as quickly as I do if I'm home. Second of all, if we want to have young people ever come on this committee, ever on this board, better realize that they are used to working remotely. They don't want to have to go if they don't have to. If they can do it from home, that's what they do nowadays. And unless you want to have a bunch of old fogies like us on this board, we better get with the times. The remote is is it.
Can I,
Ingrid,
I'm done.
Ingrid Glassman, then I'll come to you, Mary.
okay.
Steve was saying and what Barb was alluding to, I think, I agree with them that I think we should be able to allow this as an option, but that there might need to be some addressing of then, how does a chair properly run a meeting then that includes those that are online and those that are in the room? What is the expected etiquette for those who are on remotely? There are just some learning curves with that as we move into it that will make a meeting that has both run a lot more smoothly if everyone's on the same page.
Mary?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that don't worry about your townships and your people. I talk to Wayne and the supervisors twice a month. And they call me, and I don't have any problem keeping up to date what's going on with my constituents. So I just want you to know there are other ways of doing things. And this is the way we opt to do it.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I know you're an exception. Mary?
Yes, I'm here.
I appreciate both sides of different opinions, but it comes down to like we're here to represent our constituents, but I think that there could be at a time, I'm not saying that we do it now, but somebody could say, well, I live at this address within this district and may have that be their address, but then live in another state, live in another county and try to be part of this. Isn't there some restrictions on where you lay your head at night for how many days?
Absolutely.
And if you're not coming in person and showing up to that, how can you prove that you're here? And that you're living in the area that you represent?
Address the chairman. See, the floor. Okay.
Was I right?
Yes.
Mike?
Yeah, you absolutely have to live within the electoral district that you are representing. The issue of residency has come up recently, both in the redistricting context, and we had a now former supervisor who made a change of residence. I can't recall off the top of my head, but knowingly lying about your residence for the purpose of getting elected is bad news. Give me a minute and I can find out how bad we're talking. I mean, it's fraud.
Dan McGuire.
Yeah, I think that it's something you do before you run for election, not during, if you miss a month, you suddenly don't know how to represent them anymore. And I do resent being referred to as.
I play 81.
Thanks. Mr. Turk.
My feeling is the virtual participation, up to this point, we've seen some value in it. It's definitely increased opportunity for folks and fully agree that we need to continue to work on getting better at it, whether it's training board members as to how to participate virtually or those facilitating meetings, how to properly be as inclusive as they can of the virtual members when they're conducting a meeting. I think that's a skill we do need to work on through our board training.
One more comment.
Mr. Severs.
We've been talking about this virtual stuff since 2017 and 18. Every year, every term, we bring this up. So this is not new to us, but we've been talking.
I will end it with this comment. I tell you what, if we hadn't had it, we wouldn't have been able to conduct business. It allowed us to conduct business. We wouldn't have quorum. Some committees, finance and personnel, we wouldn't achieve quorum without it. So I look at it as a tool. I don't like it. Not real slick at it, but it's helped us conduct business in the end.
You could well have another pandemic.
Okay, Andy, got enough?
Yeah, I do. And with this board, I think I'm hearing consensus that I will redraft some of the rules for the board's considerations surrounding remote attendance. I can tell you that the redraft will not contain the word old fogey. that the redraft will not suggest we emulate the state legislature in any form or fashion, and that we are going to provide some leeway for making further rules about remote attendance. So I will do that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
I'm scrolling down. I think that I'm at the point where I want to talk a little bit about your current Rule 10, because that did not find its way into my redraft of the board rules. And I understand Rule 10 was designed to address a specific situation. The danger with the Rule 10 that you've got on the books, and Rule 10, for those who don't have it in front of you, is that when a motion is under discussion, there are only 3 motions that are considered in order: a motion to table, a motion to postpone, or a motion to amend. And then a motion to adjourn is always going to be in order. But there are any number of other subsidiary and privilege motions that exist that might be appropriate under certain circumstances. So my suggestion is to eliminate current Rule 10, but I didn't want to do that without a better understanding from this board as to why Rule 10 exists in the first place and if there's a need to keep it.
Mr. Rennish.
We already talked about it earlier in the very first page when we adapted Robert's Rules of Order, new edition. So.
Yeah, the feeling is no Robert's rules provide relief in this matter.
Then I will delete Rule 10, and that is fine.
Yep.
And then pending other discussion points, I think I have sufficient direction to prepare an updated draft for the board.
Page 22.
Mr. Carroll.
Confirming then, we're still going to strike everything after 410 AD, since that will be procurement finance only.
Correct.
Okay.
Say that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Rennish.
I didn't see anywhere in here, is this adopted by simple majority or 2/3?
The initial adoption is by simple majority, I believe. I would refer to Corporation Counsel Windle. I don't recall if the current rules require a 2/3 vote. If we just essentially adopt all new rules, so they'd be amended and restated rules.
Ingrid?
Supervisor Rennish, just to clarify, you're saying that we've referenced Robert's Rules of Orders in here? Because I don't see that.
It's in here.
Okay, can you tell me exactly?
1 parliamentary authority.
What was it?
4.01.
Like the first one.
That's perfect. Okay, thank you. So we're agreeing to strike Rule 10, correct?
4.01 covers all the
Yeah, I
things in
see
Rule
it.
10, plus 1.
Mr. Phillips? Mr. Phillips, did we lose you?
I'm sorry. No, I'm here. I did not hear that, Mr. Chair. I apologize.
You're not present, but the tantalizing aroma of a couple different types of chili are making their way around the room.
Seriously.
So I'm proposing that we take a short break.
Well, and of course, I'm not there in person. I cannot enjoy chili virtually. All right. That's one of the problems with the remote attendance.
Well, that's the way it goes. So if
Yes,
you would indulge us, we'll get back to you as quick as we can. Sorry to do this, but.
No, it's not a problem whatsoever, Mr. Chair. That's fine. Yes, I'm happy to indulge.
A comfort break, I guess. We're in recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appropriately timed.
Gary. You want coffee?
Could I see if we can bring that back? We can put a vent up there to.
2-minute warning.
That was.
That negates the 3-month argument. That negates the 3-month
Oh,
argument.
yeah. Oh, sure, thank you.
Got your coffee, so that's why you get it. I just wonder.
Did you want one, Richard?
No.
Typical.
We'll wait for Candace and then we'll reconvene.
Fine, gentlemen, before you're done.
You try the chicken or regular?
We are out of recess. We are convening once again.
Thank God.
Mr. Phillips, are you there?
I am here, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I guess it's time to move over to a committee structure.
Before we do that, could I just ask Corporation Counsel Wendell if he agrees with me that in looking at the current rules, I don't think a supermajority vote is required to amend the current rules. All that I see in there is that an amendment cannot be effective in the meeting in which the amendment occurs. I don't see any supermajority vote required to amend. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. We had a discussion on that during the, not an official discussion, but just a brief conversation about that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I know that question was asked.
On post?
Okay, yes, Mr. Chair, we're ready. We want to talk about committees.
I think so.
And so we really didn't get into this much last time. The question for the board is, are you satisfied with the current committee structure? And if the answer is yes, then I think that the structure needs to be reorganized to bring some clarity into the various committees. And I say that because of the question raised earlier about what's the difference between a committee or an other board and commission. And what I attempted to do in Appendix A is separate it out into three different types of committees, if you will. You have the standing committees of the board. They're going to be there every single term of the board, and they're going to be populated according to the structure that we land upon in terms of populating those committees. We have other boards and commissions, which are created by statute or by, for example, intergovernmental agreement and things of that nature. The appointments to those other boards and commissions are made by the administrator, subject to board confirmation. And then we have ad hoc committees, which are committees that are created for a special purpose with a definite time frame or shelf life, if you will. And so those committees rise from time to time, usually populated by the board unless the board delegates authority to populate those committees. And so those are the three different basic committee structures, or excuse me, types of committees under your current structure. And again, that's reflected in the board rules. So we can take the current committees that we have identified on the committee list and slot them into one of those three categories. The other opportunity that the board has right now is taking a look at the composition of the various committees and say, is there room for improvement or efficiency? Because I think over time, there's a tendency, and that this is not unique to Richland County. I've seen it in many, many other counties where eventually we have more committees than we have residents that we actually represent on the board. It's kind of silly how many committees are out there. And so the question always comes up, what committees can we consolidate? Does it make sense to consolidate certain functions under certain committees? Does that mean that we are more efficient in terms of the meetings and the focus that we have for those committees? And again, those are questions for the board. Ultimately, you get to decide that. But I think that there certainly is opportunity here for efficiency if the board is interested in exploring some of those efficiencies. And so I guess I would ask Derek and Candace about the discussion and where we turn in terms of what the potential is for looking at potential restructure of the committees, because I've been down this path with other counties, but I didn't know if they wanted to make any brief comments about the current committee structure in Richland County and what they've seen in their experience.
Well, before Candace and Derek speak, I would like to comment. We took a...
I'm sorry. I forgot about the most important person in the room, Mr. Chair. My apologies.
Well, yes, of course, you're excused. We took a first shot at this 2 years ago. And while we were able to reduce the number of committees, we created some problems and some situations that were unintended. And I don't think anyone in the room agrees that it's where we want it to be. So I think that further reconfiguration is in order. That's my thought. Candace?
So, before we got approval to bring Andy in, you'll remember that Derek and I had put together a rough look at condensing down to about 5 committees based on the La Crosse County model. We've had further discussion with Andy. We've had some further clarification. We have some ideas of what that could potentially look like. But one of the things that Derek and I did, we spent 4 hours on Friday combing through this document, looking at all of the ordinances or resolutions that were referenced, all of the statutory references, to try to figure out what we were doing that fell where it should and what we were doing that fell nowhere because we were doing it wrong. And there's a few of those too. But realistically, you know, I've heard feedback from all of you on, some of you, many of you, the same things that aren't working. So, you know, we have opportunity here, but it's your committee structure. So.
Mr. McKee?
The whole thing, and we just address places where they're not.
Mr. McKee suggests we just look at places that aren't working. Andy, do you have a comment on that?
No, it's hard to figure out where to start with this in terms of how you organize it. Again, when I took a crack at Appendix A, I tried to separate the standing committees from the boards and commissions from the ad hoc committees. And I tried to streamline by eliminating reference to some of the committees over which we don't exert any control. And so if we have an idea of what's not working, perhaps we could take a look at those issues. From my vantage point too, there are legal questions presented by this. And when I say that, I mean that there are certain statutory requirements for certain committees and boards and commissions. And so, for example, you cannot combine, just by virtue of what they do, your highway committee with your zoning committee. That can't happen. But you can take your parks commission, turn it into a committee, and put it under the zoning committee, which you are now going to call your natural resources committee, which is also going to serve as your land conservation committee. Those are things that fit in the same box. Same thing with highway. You can call it public works and fit, for example, facilities and maintenance and those functions under that public works committee, and also have it be your highway committee. So there is the potential to combine. There is the potential to create efficiencies. It is up to you as to how you want to create those efficiencies, but I will tell you there are legal impediments on certain questions. And so it can be a challenge to try to figure out where to start with that.
Maybe you could start with the legal questions that you've noticed.
Well, I don't know if Candace or Derek have the document that shows the potential for what the restructure could look like if we were to consolidate some of the committees. I don't know if it makes sense to put that on the screen.
Yep, we've got it.
We're going to blot you out, Andy. Okay.
That's fine. You can make me small.
Small.
I have a face made for radio, so that's all okay.
Can't see read it.
Hang on, let me do it. I was gonna say, should I upload it to the packet?
Yeah, well, no.
And this is a very, very like pie in the sky rough draft that as we talked through it with Andy today. And there are things that don't necessarily even fit within the confines of this kind of rough discussion piece. And we can talk through some of those too as Andy goes through the document.
And so I think that's a very good point, Candace, is that it's very difficult to come up with specific recommendation without direction from the county board about where you want to go with this. And so I'd fully anticipate coming out of this meeting with a direction from the board by consensus as to where you want to proceed with the committee structure. And we would come back to this board with a fully vetted structure that meets legal requirements and also contains different options. And so if we look at this committee structure, I think as Candace mentioned, it's based on the La Crosse model. I will tell you it's also the Ozaki model, the Washington model, and any number of other counties that I've worked with over the years when they took a look at consolidating certain functions under various committees. And here you've got an executive committee that's comprised of leadership from various other committees, similar to your finance and personnel committee right now. That executive committee would essentially take the place of the finance and personnel committee, just changing the name, but it again would be comprised of the chairs of several different committees. And then we've got a committee called Community and Health Services, and underneath that committee, we have Health and Human Services, Child Support, Pine Valley, your Commission on Aging, and your Veterans Commission. Under Natural Resources, we have Land Conservation, Zoning, and UW Extension. Under Public Works, we've got Highway, Maintenance and Facilities, Parks and Trails, and Fair. And then under Public Safety, we've got the Sheriff's Office, Emergency Management, and then various reporting mechanisms related to Register and Probate, Clerk of Court, and so on. Off to the side, you see the other boards and commissions. It's your Joint Ambulance Committee right now, your Airport Commission. I think that your ADRC falls in that category. Mississippi Valley Health Services falls in that category. And so those are not standing committees of the county board, yet the county has a role in those committees. And then, of course, there is the appointment to those commissions and boards that the county needs to make.
The county board.
And so,
Our county board.
Andy, we're fumbling here trying to find
And tonight's meeting
our
date?
packet.
Yeah, you got.
Yeah, I've done that multiple times.
226.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can email it out.
It's
Try that.
I don't think it's not syncing to the servers.
Okay, let me see if I can email it.
No, it's just doing something now.
You gotta sink in the 20.
What's yours doing, Gary?
Huh?
I did that already.
Yours is synced.
$10, how you can get your copy? Mine's synced, but when he puts a new one in, you gotta resync it in order for it to get back in.
You emailing it?
Yep, I'm emailing it. Give me a sec, and I'll have it to you.
It's showing uploaded on my end, so I don't know why it's not.
Internet.
There's a connection issue with the server. No idea. I printed copies of it right back.
We're gonna use it.
Go with another $10. Who's paying for this?
It could add up over the year. Suddenly we have a surplus. We have a fantastic party.
Gary, I almost bought you a parking meter in the same. But every time you park, I was gonna put that parking meter right there.
What are we gonna do? Are we gonna get some stickers for that or what?
It's gotta be put on an agenda.
All you have to do is go that way.
If that way's full, I took that one.
Well, no, but
Okay, I
it's
just
always
emailed
open in
it.
front of Ingram's house.
See
Ingram's
if it
house.
comes in faster,
Empty.
better.
Park and Ingram's driveway.
There you go.
We can all squeeze in there.
Full document.
7 people.
It's-
Read it.
I don't still get out. So
I don't have it. Send an email.
over there.
Go to your
Feel free.
I
email.
gotta go to my email.
Oh, Mike, I didn't send it to you. Hold on.
You can't, can you share, Jim?
Yes.
No.
Sure.
Can you share on there or no?
Derek's getting hard copies. Or it's in your email.
There it is.
Oh, we have it in our email. I'm saying he needs to be able to share it on there.
Than the way I created it. I created it with white lettering. And it's got dark lettering, it's hard to see.
And some of them are really,
Very,
I'm just giving you a hard time.
no, but seriously, look at mine. The lettering is white. So I don't know why your lettering is black.
Probably this, or the format, it had to be emailed in. I emailed a PowerPoint one time and it screwed it all up.
Showing it late for me, but I'm opening it.
You're opening it on the computer. How strange.
Thank you, sir.
Do anything.
Just you, Don.
Does Andy have it?
Yeah.
Like,
He sent it to me earlier.
I guess
We talked about it.
black.
I didn't know.
It's just black on our iPads. I forwarded it to my computer and it's white.
$10 I'll give you for a hard copy.
The color copy is more than $10.
Okay, I think we're all set now.
And
Andy?
so this is an example of the consolidation that has occurred again in some other counties. And again, looking for feedback from the county board about if you're interested in consolidating some of these committees. And if so, we can come back with a specific recommendation of what that might look like. In other words, take community and health services. And you're looking at that saying, wait a second, so we're going to take Pine Valley, HHS, Child Support, Commission on Aging, Veterans Commission, we're going to put that all under one committee. How is that ever going to work? Well, it can work, and I can draw up all of the duties associated with that Community and Health Services Committee. I can tell you how it complies with all of the various statutes that impact the various subcomponents of that committee. But if you tell me that you don't want the consolidation under Community and Health Services, then I won't do that, if that makes sense. I will tell you that the change from administrative coordinator to administrator puts the county board and the county board committees much more in the policy oversight mode. What does that mean? That means that it's not as much related to the day-to-day oversight and operations of any particular department as much as it is budget review, reporting on the success or failures associated with particular programs, and otherwise fulfilling statutory responsibilities attended upon any particular committee or board. And so in making the shift that we see here in other counties that I've worked with, they have reported success in focusing on the policy measures that fall under the umbrella of each of the committees that you see listed here. Again, 59.03 of the statutes allow you to organize yourself the way you best see fit. And so there might be a different way to organize your committees, and that's okay. I can tell you that personally, I was a bit confused looking at your current committee structure to find out exactly what it is that you were accomplishing with some of those committees. Not to say that we can't just clarify what we have now and move forward, that's fine. But I thought I'd at least have a discussion with you about your interest in pursuing a model similar to this so that I could do some work on putting some meat to the bones, as it were, to this structure for your consideration. But again, I didn't want to do that without your feedback first.
Right. So I've got hands up here. And I will call on those hands, but we're looking at this model. Everyone has it? Okay. So, Mr. McKee.
I think Pine Valley Board of Trustees should be stand alone because they're unique to the county and they have a different purpose than the rest of the county.
And what is that purpose, sir?
To assure adequate patient care in Pine Valley.
Andy?
Yes.
You had a point about the Board of Trustees, and that's what Mr. McKee is addressing. Would you want to address that now?
Yeah, and the reason that I would suggest that you put that into a committee of the county board is that the statute that currently governs the Board of Trustees, 46.18, is a very old statute. It speaks to this concept of county homes. We haven't had county homes in this state for 50 years. And so the statutes actually limit what it is the county can do, as opposed to creating the opportunity to do things with Pine Valley that you want to do. That it doesn't mean that it loses its focus on patient care. That focus remains. What it means is that there aren't strict governance procedures that you need to follow that you would otherwise have to follow if you're going to operate as a board of trustees under 46.18.
So basically that eliminates the board of trustees.
It subsumes it within the Community and Health Services Committee. That's right. So it's an elimination, but it's subsumed within that committee.
Then the citizen members that are on.
Just one.
What was that question?
And so
Citizen member?
if I can address, so there's
Oh, yeah.
if we were to do that type of committee, the community health, it's very, very specific because it would satisfy so many different statutes. Derek, do you have the breakdown of it? I don't have my old copy, I guess. But there have to be so many members. They have to be 5 board members. There have to be 5 members over the age of 60, 9 board members, 5 board members, 5 over the age of 60, 4 public. One of them has to be a consumer of services. 1 doctor, we do our best to find 1 doctor and a nurse.
You're
And
talking about the health and human services.
if we were to do a community and health services board, so that would all be able to be, that would satisfy all the requirements of all the various committees that it would statutorily cover. Yes.
Since we're discussing this, I see Trisha's online. Put you on the spot, Trisha, but we had some questions with our specific makeup that we have right now with HHS and the veteran and the DHS doing our review. Would this fulfill, had she spoken with you about that at all? I don't know if this would answer all the questions that we had because currently it wasn't.
Trish Clements?
Well, I believe what you were asking, right now we have too many members.
Right, and you're proposing that this would actually bring that down to where we
It would
need,
bring it
and
down.
it would still satisfy Board of Health,
Correct.
veterans.
Well, and veterans is a whole other issue. And Andy can speak to that a little more closely, but the Veterans Commission is actually, wouldn't necessarily be under this realm. And so he can address that, too, because we found some nuances with that.
No, that's right. No, Veterans Commission is a separate entity, so to speak, that exists separate and apart from the committee structure. And we have to think about it not so much in terms of reporting relationship as much as liaison. So the Veterans Commission would liaison with Community and Health Services. So if the Veterans Commission has an issue that it wants to raise with the county board, the commission has the ability to do it by going through the Community and Health Services Committee.
Mr. Chair.
So they would function separate than the
It
veterans.
would be meeting with the.
Can you speak about the makeup of that Veterans Commission, as you called it?
The Veterans Commission is required by statute under Chapter 45, and I don't have the specific statute in front of me, but it's comprised of persons that are veterans and live in Richland County, and so they are concerned with the overall operation of the veteran services programs in the county. They don't have the power to appropriate money. They don't have control over any budget or anything like that. They are truly a policy-making oversight type commission. And so they might have recommendations that they want to bring back to the county board about different initiatives or programs that they would like to see in Richland County. If that's the case, under this type of a structure, that Veterans Commission would come to the Community and Health Services Committee and say, here's what we would like to see proposed to the county board, and the Community Health and Community and Health Services Committee would make that determination about what that recommendation looks like that goes to the county board.
And Andy, that statute is 45.81.
Right.
And
Yes.
then it also covers 45.85 and 45.86.
Correct.
Yes, then, Mr. Steve?
Who has the, authority, the ability to appoint members to this commission? How is that?
The Veterans Commission would be an administrator appointment because that is considered a board or commission under 59.18 of the statutes. But again, there are qualifications to that appointment, and the appointments would be subject to county board confirmation.
When you say appointed by the administrator, it's subject to county board approval, correct?
Correct. County board confirmation. That's right.
You clarified that earlier from a statement.
Mr. Steve?
Mr. Chairman, if I might say a few words, I probably have stronger feelings about the Veterans Commission than any committee I've ever been on. I have great respect for the committee that I'm on and people I've served with. I've been associated with the Veterans Commission or committee since I've been on the county board, and it has an interesting history. Originally, when I came on the board, there was a Veterans Committee that reported to Health and Human Services for budget purposes only. And if personnel issues came up, it involved the Personnel Finance Committee. It was kind of a hodgepodge, and there was a reorganization about the time I came on, and they appointed a Veterans Commission of 5 people, 3 veterans who were board members, 3 or 4 veterans, and one who was not, but 1 or 2 that were not board members. And as that evolution evolved, we reorganized, restructured. The Veterans Commission was, it was called both, was combined with Health and Human Services. And our thinking, we were thinking, I think, proactively that it was my view and the view of others that really the Veterans Service Office is a human services position. And there's much to be gained with its association with the resources of human services, mental health, social security, aging and disability, lots of other specialized resources. There was great resistance on the part of the existing commission members and the Veteran Service Officer to having any movement at all for human services. In fact, the Veteran Service Officer called the Pine Valley Board, the Pine Valley Director, and asked if she could go there, or her committee could go there. There was just tremendous resistance. First of all, there was great resistance to us having a commissioner, a county commissioner, to answer to. There was always the argument that stand alone. We stand alone. I stand alone as a Veteran Service Officer, no more so than any other health human services worker stands alone under the same standards of confidentiality and professional privacy protection. So we have found now, since we've been with Health and Human Services, being an old farmer, I could put the analogy this way. It was sort of like trying to get the horse to be in the same barn with the cattle. It just didn't fit in the stanchions as far as the Veteran Service Officer was concerned. The horse didn't want to go in the barn. We have very, very professional people on the Human Services Board, but there was no institutional familiarity or knowledge by the Health and Human Services Board of the history and the workings, functions, the duties, the responsibilities of the veterans side of it. The predominance of business in that combined committee was such that about 90% of it was Health and Human Services, and about 5 or 10 minutes of it was with the veterans issue, a short, brief, non-accountable report, basically from the Veteran Service Officer, with not much time to dig in and ask questions. Some questions asked by the veterans on the committee, 3 veterans, but none usually by the members of the Health and Human Service Board, except for the chair who would ask questions on occasion. But there needed to be a lot of thought given to how that is going to work. It was our hope, especially, that the Veteran Service Office could move in with the Human Service building, be under the supervision, perhaps of the Health and Human Service Director or ADRC. There was tremendous resistance to that, let alone the resistance to taking direction from an administrator. I think, that it makes sense that we have an administrator who deals with the day-to-day operations. And it makes sense that we have a veterans committee of county board members only, who are advisory, the administrator only, and meet on occasion with the Veteran Service Office. They have a responsibility to receive reports, to gather information, to look for accountability, to know what the Veteran Service Officer is really doing with their time and with the county's money. That is a different function entirely than that of the commission members who meet very confidentially. The write-up or the duties and responsibilities now of the combined committee of veterans combined with Health and Human Services says this. It says the Health and Human Services Board shall act as the Veterans Commission. Statutorily, they cannot act as the Veterans Commission. It's not in the statutes. The statutes call for, and I will ask our vice chair to read exactly what it says in the statutes. It's 8580, chapter 4581. The statutes prescribe what the veteran does. The county board decides what the duties and responsibilities of oversight for veterans office in terms of personnel, the policies I'm talking about, the personnel responsibilities.
Mr. Seep, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
I will wrap it up. I've been here 12 years. I've fought with this thing for 12 years. I feel very passionate about it. The one damn thing I'd like to see straightened out before I leave is the Veteran Service Office.
Yes, sir. You had a question then?
Sure.
Is he supposed to read?
Yes, Mr. Turk has a short paragraph.
It depends on what you consider to be a short paragraph. Is there a particular paragraph?
Just that the part that addresses the prescription for the number of veterans on the committee and what they're supposed to do.
Okay. So that's section number 1. This is taken directly from the statute. There is created in each county a county veterans service commission consisting of at least 3 residents of the county who are veterans appointed for staggered 3-year terms by the county executive or county board chairperson in a county that does not have a county executive.
Thank you.
Okay. You had a legal question before that, Don, that I thought Andy Phillips could address.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was.
I had a
legal question. Help me
Then
out.
I'm off the hook. I'm off the hook.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. McKee?
I want to get something straight here. If we go with this proposal, we're eliminating board of trustees. Which you says is the old statute, but it's still a statute, correct?
It is, that's correct, absolutely. And you have the ability to organize your committee to assume the responsibilities of that board of trustees, if that's what you want to do. You don't have to do that. You don't. I've seen it happen in other counties. In other counties, they still maintain a board of trustees. That's entirely up to you. All I'm suggesting is giving you some additional flexibility to create efficiencies. That's the only suggestion.
As I was assured by a couple of people actually in this room, that the board of trustees wasn't going to be able to.
We're talking about Pine Valley now.
People in
We're talking about Pine Valley.
Pine Valley Board of
Yes. Ingrid?
I just have a question. This executive committee, is this taking the place of finance and personnel?
It's all in one.
And what are you proposing the makeup of that?
We haven't even just, well, it would be all the chairs of all the committees for sure.
Okay.
But again, that's way out in front. I mean, this is just an idea of possibilities.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that's where those two committees.
Yes.
stand.
Mr. Carroll has a question.
Mr. Chair, I have a question, Linda.
Linda?
Statement.
Steve first. Steve Carroll first, and Linda. Steve?
General here. In this direction, where we were talking about the learning curve it takes to become a supervisor, get knowledgeable enough to provide policy guidance that has some background to it. This makes it even more challenging for all of us to do that, because now there's more areas, widen the areas that you have to be familiar with. And frankly, right now, I don't think we do a very good job of giving policy guidance that has been well informed.
Thank you. Linda?
I blanked out. Oh, if rules and regulations, would that be the executive? That's one question. I have another one.
It could be, if that's where you decide to put rules and regulations, that would make sense.
Okay, I don't see it. That's why I was wondering, since it's a major committee now.
I think the thing we all have to remember, though, and Andy has said it well, is that the role of the committee has moved from the actual work product to more of a advisory or policy-making function than some of the old committee work that we're used to, Ingrid.
So on that note, I agree with Steve.
Wait, I had two parts.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Linda. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I understand that, and I think that's good. But this tonight is we didn't have our rules meeting because of this meeting tonight, because we wanted, but if we want to change anything on this and we don't like how it's going, I don't see any way to do that in this new committee structure. And then the other thing is, I have not been on Pine Valley, but I was on the board when we voted for it, and it was a big commitment financially and borrowing, and it's a huge part of our county debt at the moment. And I feel if we want to have policy that Health and Human Services takes a long time to learn, that I think that it should be a separate committee, Pine Valley, because it's just too hard to oversee the policy of that entity. It's too important to our board. Done.
Are you done, Linda?
Yes.
Harry Severson?
I'm just not a fan of having the committee chairs be on the executive committee. I think everybody's got their own talents and different things where if a person's not elected a committee chair or appointed a committee chair, that they may add value on the finance committee or rules committee, or maybe a person doesn't want to be on the finance committee, but like to be on other committees and don't really want to deal with that. So I think the opportunity to have that opened up to whoever, I think that would be good. And then secondly, when we went to this model, we talked about all the stuff that we're talking about right now in detail, reading the statute. We've already discussed that 2 years ago in detail from January until April, when it began. But one thing that I noticed with this new restructure that we did is that our meetings are taking much longer. On some circumstances, some of them are not, but there's a lot more details to that, but I can see them extending out quite a while. If you're dealing with stuff with Pine Valley and whatever, but I noticed that our Health and Human Services meetings are now like a half hour long compared to what they used to be, so.
Ingrid Glassrenner?
I don't know if we can cover this tonight, but when we're making these decisions about whether or not to consolidate into something that looks similar to this, I guess I would agree with Steve. We talked at the beginning of this whole procedure, Andy presented that our role is more of policy making, policy oversight, and he also mentioned visionary, strategic planning, comprehensive planning. I would just like to have more information. What does that look like when you do have committees that are this large? How do you conscientiously have some sort of vision, are overseeing strategic planning and policy when you've got this? I'm not opposed to this, but I want to know practically for those counties, how does that work? What does that look like? Because I do think we need to move into that, but we need some guidance on how does that look.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The one thing, and Andy, I would like you to speak to this, but the one thing I know, 3 weeks ago or so, I was on my weekly administrator call and everybody was having this discussion because it's that time where everyone's looking at their committee structure, their board rules, all those things. And the one administrator said, nothing that is operational goes on the agenda.
That's what I was.
And we have a lot of operational things that are on our agendas right now. And so I think letting those operational things be handled by the department heads and the administrator would significantly reduce the number of items that are on. Also, the changes to the finance policy, as we discussed, where if it's in the budget, it's approved, it doesn't have to be approved at the committee level. You still get those things to review, but they wouldn't require action. So those are a couple of examples that I can offer, and I'm sure Andy can offer more than that. But it just so happened that was just a topic of discussion, and I found it interesting listening to some of the longer in the tooth administrators from around the state and their comments.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rennies?
Well, I was gonna say the same thing, Candace brought it up. I can speak on Pine Valley, I can speak on HHS. Pine Valley, most of our agenda items are reviewing checks. You know, that's not where this is supposed to go. And I think that's what everybody's having a hard time comprehending, is that operational will not be part of the agenda. It's policy. So we gotta, I'm new on the board, some of the old farts. You gotta rethink.
It's been worse,
But before Andy,
You've got to think about it differently.
before Andy responds to that, I just want to clarify. I agree with that. I'm not opposed to that. My question is, how do we become knowledgeable enough to have policy oversight when we have this many, what does that look like?
Well, that's, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but my answer to that would be that's where you trust your experts to bring forward the items that are needing to be looked at, to be worked on, and they will educate you. I mean, that's where you have to work with those department heads and legislators, whatever is going on, to be in tune to the changes that may need to occur based on day-to-day operations, because that's really what drives when a policy change needs to happen, or a legislative change, then a policy change needs to happen. Andy, more to add?
Well, the only thing I will add to that is that if you look at an agenda in, for example, Ozaukee County, that's one of the models that we looked at in terms of efficiencies with committee structure. Their agendas now are much more focused on reporting and resolutions or ordinance amendments, because you affect policy at the board level through resolution or ordinance, and the board doesn't consider ordinance or resolution unless the committee proposes that. And so the committee would receive reports from department head level or administrator level staff about performance within their particular department, and also about policy initiatives that they would like to see advanced to the county board. And then it's up to the committee to determine what is going to go to the county board. I think that the question surrounding what is the appropriate level of information that we need in order to convince ourselves or make us comfortable that we are acting as good stewards of the resources that we've been given, those are great questions. And I think there is going to be a learning curve associated with that. But I think that, too, there is a way that if you have a condensed committee structure, if you will, that it forces you into a more policy-focused role as opposed to the traditional oversight as it relates to operations. And I say that fully understanding that there will be that transition period that may be difficult to distinguish between administrative operations as opposed to policy oversight. And I struggle with trying to figure out a great way to explain this because it's something that you have to see and experience and get comfortable with. It's not simply taking an agenda or a series of minutes and saying, see, this is how they do it, because you may do it completely differently, and that's okay. But it is more of a policy focus as opposed to operations.
Mr. Chair, may I speak? This is Barb.
Chair Linda. Go
Uh,
ahead, Barb.
I think Barb was first, then Linda.
I have two questions. The first one is, when I look at this committee restructuring, HHS, Pine Valley, and everything else, those are, I can't imagine being informed enough to make a good decision on anything. It's just too much, too important. It's all about people and their lives, and that just kind of scares me when I see putting that all on one committee. Second thing I'm wondering is, we keep talking about Ozaki and these other counties. They have hundreds of thousands of people, and we have 17,000 people. How do the county boards on the smaller counties work? Do they do like Ozaki County, or are they doing something different? I'm just curious.
I think that's a great question, and I will tell you that, for example, in Burnett County, they have less residents than Richland County, and Burnett does it similar to the way that Ozaki does. And so I only bring up Ozaki County given my familiarity with the county. I live in Ozaki County, and I've represented them for going on 20 years now. So forgive me if I lean on Ozaki County, but because I just know a lot about how Ozaki County works. And so I think that to the extent you have questions like that, it would be worth exploring what a Burnett County does. Pepperell County is going through a transition right now as it relates to moving from administrative coordinator to administrator. And we can look at all sorts of other examples. But I think it ultimately comes down to what you're comfortable with, because this is your board and your committee structure. And so I'm certainly happy to get you additional examples that are out there. And if you want to use comparable population as a measure or a benchmark, I'm happy to do that for you.
Thank you.
I think that would be helpful. Carrie Severson?
When we went and redid this
Linda was on.
committee restructure
We'll come back.
2 years ago, I just want to say that we did model after the famed La Crosse and Ozaki counties when we did that. So and we're still modeling after them during this restructure. So I call them famed because that's all we talked about.
Linda?
I sometimes just have a hard time understanding policy, because if you don't understand the budget on the committee you're on at all, if you're not showing it, you can't help form policy for the committee or what forward. And also, the legislature has underfunded many parts or demanded that funds go to many parts at one time of our county structure. And if you don't understand all those aspects, how can we do legislative initiatives for the county board together to do things if we don't understand the budget and the policy? So when you say they won't be on the agenda at all, I don't understand how you're going to know anything if you don't have some of that on the agenda.
Well, we all vote on the budget. I mean, there won't be a monthly tallying.
Well, forgive me if I suggested that budget discussion would not be on the agenda. That was not what I intended at all. I think budget performance, fiscal financial performance of any particular department that falls under the umbrella of a particular committee is critically important, because one of the ways that you effectuate policy is through your budget, through your appropriation. And so I think you need to have reporting as it relates to performance according to budget. And depending upon what committee we're talking about in the structure, there are going to be other different measures of performance that you're going to want to see at the committee level. I think when I talk about stepping out of the operations role into the policy oversight role, I'm not talking about neglecting finance. I'm talking about not approving certain bills or vouchers that had already been approved through the budget process, because that takes time at the committee level. And frankly, the committee is not in the best position to approve those vouchers or expenses. And if those vouchers or expenses have already been approved as an expenditure in the budget, I don't know why the committee would take them up. That was my only point in terms of the separation.
And that's a valid point. Anyone else here? Mr. McGuire.
Quick question. I don't know if I'm missing this somehow, but I don't see any mention of the education committee. Is that going to be just?
There won't be one.
There won't be one. Okay, all right.
Extension would be the remnant of that.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Will there still be a Parks Commission then?
There'll be a Parks Committee, probably not a commission.
Is that statutory?
No, we don't have to have a Parks Commission, but the commission requires specific things. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andy. The commission requires, it's more restrictive than having just the committee.
That's correct. Keep going, Candace.
I'm learning, Andy, I'm learning.
You're doing a great job.
And so that's why we left it as a committee reporting to Public Works.
Yeah, think about it this way. In terms of, and I'm struggling, as you probably can notice, with trying to explain this simply. But take everything that your current committees, commissions, boards, everything, take everything that they do. That is still going to be done, but it's going to be done in a structure that gives you the most flexibility in terms of creating the efficiency to have it done under your committees, as opposed to having a whole series of different commissions, boards, and things that are subject to certain statutory constraints. All right. If something is required to be done by statute, we don't have a choice. We have to do it that way. If the statute says you may do it one way or another way, we're going to choose the option that gives us, again, the most flexibility to create efficiency. So Parks Commission is a great example. We don't have to have one. All right. Right now, we chose to have one, and so we have one. We don't have to have it. We can subsume the responsibilities that the Parks Commission currently has within this new Public Works Committee. So that's what we're going to do. Again, the duties, responsibilities, they don't go away, but we're not going to be tied to constraints created by the statute that says if you have a Parks Commission, this is what you have to do, if that makes sense.
McKee.
Not quite understanding. There will still be a Parks Committee separate?
It would be subsumed within Public Works. Under this model, if this is what you choose to do, the duties of the Parks Commission or Committee would fall under Public Works. So Public Works would have as one of its responsibilities to take care of all the things that the Parks Commission does.
And there would be subcommittees essentially. So if the Parks Committee wants to have a separate meeting and then they need action, they can go to Public Works to get that action taken.
So the Public Works Committee is not going to be functioning as a Parks Committee?
No, no.
Can I ask what the reasoning is for having, I don't have a problem with this, I'm just wanting to hear the reasoning for why extension is placed under natural resources.
When we looked at all the several other models, that's where they have traditionally gone. They have a lot to do with ag, they have to do, so it just, that's where it seems to fall more often than not. So that's really why it's there.
Thank you.
And, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Steve.
let me ask you, I might have misunderstood you, but I think what we're saying here is that oversight in terms of county governance, of the Veterans Service would be left with Health and Human Services, and the Veterans Service Commission would be carved out for its specific and limited duty over dealing with the needy veterans. Is that what you're saying?
Andy, is
Or
that?
what did you propose?
I think that's right, because the statute requires the Veteran Service Commission to exist, and it's going to always be a separate commission. It can be comprised of county board members, that's fine. I think that the linkage, there has to be a linkage between Veterans Commission, Veteran Service Commission, and county board, and that linkage is established through Community and Health Services. If you decide you don't want that linkage there, that's okay. We just have to figure out where that linkage is, because having 37 different commissions or committees go directly to county board is inefficient. But yes, Veterans Service Commission, it's a statutory commission. It would exist separate from that Community and Health Services, so to speak.
And they're very limited in what they do. Right?
Correct.
Only deal with needy veterans funding.
Yeah, that's it. They have a statutory responsibility. That's absolutely right. But at some point, the Veterans Service Commission might want to send a message to the county board that says, hey, we need a resolution on the books providing X, Y, and Z for the benefit of the veterans in Richland County. There's got to be a mechanism for that commission to get that type of resolution to the county board.
So would there be liaison between the Veterans Commission and the policy-making committee over veteran services? Or would that liaison be with whom? Would it be with the administrator? Who would it be with the administrator?
Well, it'd be through Community and Health Services under this structure.
But the veteran service officer would report directly
To the administrator.
To the administrator.
To the administrator, that's right, because that's by statute, and so.
And where would the administrator get her policy-making advice, the implementation of decisions? Would she get
Well, she would get it from the Veteran Service Commission. She would get it from the county board. I mean, she would get direction from the county board ultimately.
Okay, I think that requires some more thought.
It does. Mr. Severson?
Looking through, I wasn't here at the last meeting, but seeing some comments that were made on the one that was posted in the packet from the 12th of February. It talked about the LEPC committee, whether we needed to have it or not. Are we still gonna keep the LEPC committee?
It would just be absorbed as a liaison committee to public safety.
That's a federally required committee to have that.
Yep, and it would be
And
liaison
it's got
underneath.
certain membership that requires it to be there, so. And then it says that you talked about, you don't think that there could be a different chair of the committee?
Well, that wasn't,
That has to have the chair, there has to be a chairman of that committee that is required by federal.
yeah.
US code,
there's a
actually.
Comment that you had put in there, and I'm not sure what the result of that or where that came from.
I mean, obviously, I think that's a great point that there's a whole lot of detail that's not included on this chart. There are a lot of state and federal requirements that are imposed upon counties as it relates to maintenance of various committees or commissions or boards. We do not want to interrupt any sort of grant program, funding program, anything. So we'd want to make sure that we satisfy all of those state and federal requirements. In other words, there's a heck of a lot of detail that needs to be added to this chart. But again, didn't want to undertake the exercise of adding a lot of detail until I know from this board that, yeah, this is the direction we want to go.
Andy,
Yes.
wondering where we are, and I'm sure you are too.
No, yeah, it's a bit overwhelming when you start thinking about it because your mind comes up with all sorts of different questions. If you would like, I don't have to do a detailed recitation of all of the duties and responsibilities, but if you'd like, I can certainly add some additional color to what you see in this structure. I can also inquire of some counties of similar size to see what structure they have so that you have some comparators, and bring that back to you for your consideration.
Yeah, I think that's going to be necessary.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Turk.
We've had one go at this 2 years ago. We're trying again now, trying to make better what we did the last time. We did some good things last time. Some things didn't feel right still. We can do the same thing again in 2 more years if we don't get it exactly right this time. But the important thing is we're taking steps in the right direction and we're not causing more problems than we solve.
So to go off of what Vice Chair Turk was talking about, I think, and I was a firm believer at this 2 years ago when we did this, and I was the only one that voted no on the restructuring because I think that we need to go at this thoughtfully and slowly and not rush it. And I think it still is the same in my thought to this day is let's go through this and implement it as we go throughout these next couple of years. So let's work on one thing, let's get it going, let's implement it, let's see how it's working, then move into another one. Don't implement it, run, see what works in 2 years, and then, oh, let's redo it another 2 years. Just slowly get into it, ease into it. It takes a lot of time. We got a lot of discussion. You don't need to rush it. We're still functioning government as we are and providing it. We're trying to make it efficient. Let's just take our time with it.
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
The 2-year cycle is important because we have to organize ourselves around whatever structure we pick. So as we organize each board every 2 years, that's kind of our milestone. So we wouldn't have a ton of flexibility in between that to reshuffle a lot of things.
I think you do. We did it before. We changed committees all the time. We had committees all the time. Statutes provide that for it, 59. Whereas to how we provide our government, it's just that we're wanting something to do to get it so we can just start going. But I think we just slowly implement it, like keep what we got right now and just work on it as we go. Change it as we go. Not just all do it all at once and say, well, let's hope this works here and then come back at it and say, well, that didn't work so good this time. And make this like a working document so we can get it fixed.
Gary, if you look at this document, some of this just absolutely looks sweet, the way it's set up.
Sure, I'm not against it. What I'm saying is don't rush into it because we rushed into it before 4 months. We reorganized this whole county in 3 months, essentially. And now we're here 2 years discussing, well, we got to do this again. Let's not keep having these 3-4 hour meetings and slowly work into this over time.
Mr. Wendell?
So, Mr. Chair, I have a comment and then a question. The comment would be the last time that this board undertook this, it was driven in large part by members of the board who solicited and did not necessarily internalize advice of counsel by contracting with Attorney Phillips and getting his expertise on this. This board is getting a wealth of experience and knowledge on this subject that is, I mean, I'm decades away from it, from being able to offer it. So, this process may seem rushed because it's the first time this board is doing it, but by relying on Attorney Phillips' expertise, you are drawing on decades of trial and error that has not worked. And, his insight, his advice here is invaluable. The question, and Andy, I'm being a little bit selfish here, is I don't see where I report to, and I don't know if there should be a place for that.
You don't report to anybody, Mike, after you say those good things about me.
So, I would just fall under an administrator report.
You're an administrator report, and if there's a committee that you go to, I think it belongs probably under public safety or executive committee.
Mr. Chair, I just
Yes.
want to state something. So Carrie, in response to what you said, respectfully, I think that because of the amount of things that are so intertwined here, it's really hard in this time frame that we have to implement some change without it starting a domino effect on everything else. Where I do agree with you and where I think we fell short the last time, but part of this was because of the change in administrator and other things that were going on, is I think that this process of looking at it should have started a year or so ago, but we had other extenuating circumstances. So my request would be if we go forward with this, and I think that we should go forward with trying to attempt a restructure again, is to start looking at it and how it's going earlier in the cycle so that we don't run into this being crammed into the last month.
I
And to have
mentioned
that-
that before.
Yes, I know, and I agree with you. I do think that there were extenuating circumstances that made it a bit difficult this last cycle.
And can I just say,
Mr. Chair?
with that,
No.
as far as, now I'm in and I'm stable. If I would have been here last year at this time, yes, we would have started much earlier to have time to do that. But I wasn't, I'm not, I'm only 7 months in. But I heard the feedback from many of you that we're not happy with the way that the structure was working. And again, kind of with that whole rebuilding, that's why I asked the permission to bring in Andy, so that we are building a good, strong foundation now going forward, that we know the statutes are right, that we know the ordinances and the resolutions are right, and everything that we do from here should only get better because we know we're starting from scratch in the right way. That kind of echoes what Mike says, is, when you have the expert in the room, it makes it a lot easier to feel good about what you're doing and know that you're building a good base.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Linda.
Yes, Linda.
We did rush the last one. And we asked repeatedly last year to have it reviewed, and we were ignored. There were several of us. So if we rush this one in and we don't have any date when it has to be exactly reviewed, that would not work, because how are we going to know until 2 years? And even though it's better for the new members to come on and not have it be, I agree with Carrie, this should be done really well. And maybe we could just set a date that, we only have a month, and I have a million questions and won't be able to get them answered because I won't be here, but I think you do too. I think we could have it where we go with the current structure and state that as of October, 1, we will implement the new structure and set a reasonable time.
Okay, anybody else? One last comment, Mr. C. Last comment.
Mr. Chairman, just a brief comment with regard to, Window asked a question, said, who do I report to? And I envision, Window, it's very, very important to us. And I can see where there are times when he's getting calls from perhaps department heads, asking for advice. And with all the department heads we have, I think that must be a little overwhelming sometimes. I think that we would envision probably in the end, a Window voting either to the chair or reporting into the chair, or the chair is designating the administrator, one or the other. And I also believe that if there's advice needed by a department head or a department, that it should filter through the administrator to the chair. There's some things that may not require legal advice after she talks to them, but I think that if it's a personnel matter, for example, Wendell's primary job is to defend the county board. And if you have an employee who has problems, contradiction of the county board's policy, then, Wendell can't be advising comfortably that employee or that department head, right? So that's why it's important that he does have a person through whom he reports, a person or a chain. And it's also important that those department heads have a change so that the flow of questions are properly monitored and filtered.
Okay, Mr. Seep, we're really straying from committee structure here, so.
Well, he asked the question.
I know, and you're answering it, but I'm gonna move on. McKee, any last comment? One Pine Valley alone, right?
Yes.
Okay, Ken?
I like this. I find it frustrating because our time is valuable for everybody. I find it frustrating going to meetings and reviewing checks and bills that were budgeted. It's just frustrating to me.
That in most cases have already been paid.
I like this, whatever we do, we take, it's always gonna be some fight. Always.
Ingrid? Chance, no, Gary? Slow down. Steve?
I agree with
Speed
Kenny.
up.
I agree with Kenny. We were approving $2 and $3 bills when I started 8 years ago. If you don't trust your department heads, then why have them? If it's not, it isn't the government you wanted, then why did we vote for it? So we need to keep moving forward. Slowing down is not the answer because you can't implement it one piece at a time. It's either all or none.
We could change the government. Us county board right now, we don't have to go with the administrator form of government. We could go back to the administrative coordinator. You could, at any point in time. The county board can do that. And we could even go to an executive form of government. if you want.
You know, we'll have
Mr. Chair, do you want to ask those online and Dan and Steve if they have anything yet?
Yeah.
You didn't ask me what I had to say, but I have nothing to say.
Linda?
I think I've said enough.
Barb?
I would like us to work this through well. I think it's a good idea, but I think we're also rushing again because there's a lot of things and I need to see a whole structure of all the other committees that aren't the major committees.
Barb Scott, do you have a comment, last comment? Barb Voice. Barb Voice, do you have a last comment? Mary Miller, do you have a last comment?
You're on mute.
Andy, we're looking at possible meeting dates and it looks like we're not gonna get this done in one more meeting. We're probably gonna need 2.
Well, I think that on the board rules, I think that, well, I don't know if one is going to do it, but I think that I have really good direction on that. And so I think we should target the next board meeting for having a really good set of rules that we can make final decision on.
Are you referring this back to the rules committee?
No. Dave, need a resolution on this quickly.
Finance, fifth.
We're trying to find a date.
Sure.
All right, the 12th.
Both works for me. I can certainly be, and I assume remote is just fine.
5 p.m., same time. Can you make that, Mr. Phillips?
I would be happy to.
Okay.
If I could make one request, Mr. Chair?
Uh-huh.
We've asked for feedback and we get very little in feedback to give to Andy prior to coming into the room. It would be super helpful if we could get the feedback that you all have prior to coming in here so that he can have stuff ready to roll and kind of go through it. So that would be really helpful. Thoughts, concerns, comments, criticisms, whatever you have to get that down. Or questions, because we could maybe be getting some of those answers in the interim for you as well.
You'll get that.
Not to be facetious or anything, but part of this is that we didn't have this to look at beforehand. And for me personally, some of the decisions that we're talking about in the board rules really have to do with what we do with this. So it's kind of hard to have that discussion if we don't have all the pieces. So, and even this, I find it hard to have without having discussion on what exactly does this look like, you know? And that's.
Well,
difficult
next
to do.
meeting, Andy's gonna figure it out. Put color in it.
No, and I'll take full responsibility for that. It's
August
a cart and
12th.
horse. Yeah.
Well, March 12th.
March 12th, okay.
Aye. Okay. Motion to adjourn.
This works for me too, if you want.
Okay, second Manning, all in favor, aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
Thank you all.